What's up guys, my name is Ace, and it's finally time for me to share a proper Modern Warfare 2 wishlist video, where I'm basically just going to be sharing a list of a bunch of things that I want to see in Modern Warfare 2, as well as a bunch of things I don't want to see from recent years. And with this, I tried to focus on things that I consider to be realistic. I didn't want to stretch the imagination too far. Many of these things we've already seen in older Call of Duty games, and I just want to see them come back, or I'd like to see them iterate on things that are already in the franchise. Also, it is worth noting for a lot of this stuff, I have talked about it before, of course, and I will continue talking about it in the future. And I'm sure a lot of you longtime viewers could guess most of the things on this list before I even get into it. So just wanted to point that out, and I also wanted to point out this is going to be focused on regular multiplayer. I'm not talking about Warzone at all here, or like DMZ or anything like that. This is just the regular multiplayer experience. And with all that out of the way, let's hop into my wish list for Modern Warfare 2's multiplayer. And let's start it off with the items that aren't directly related to gameplay, and then we'll focus more on the gameplay-centered elements. And the first thing I've got here, and one of the biggest things I feel has been missing in recent years of Call of Duty, is a solid long-term progression that actually matters and that players actually care about. I really don't want to see seasonal resets where your player level essentially means nothing because it's just going to get reset next season and therefore you don't care about player XP. And I'm totally fine if this means they bring back the traditional prestige system that we always had in Call of Duties of the past, or if they have an entirely new system. I'm also open to that as long as it's engaging and rewarding long term. Speaking of progression, let's talk a little bit about weapon progression. I really hope that you can go from having 0 attachments on your gun to all of the attachments available in a much more reasonable time than we've seen over the past couple years, at least with Call of Duty. I feel it shouldn't be as much of a chore to grind a weapon to its maximum level. However, with this, I'd also love to see the return of weapon prestiging. So you can max it out and get all the attachments really quickly, but for those that want the extra grind and they really want to take it to the next level, let them prestige their weapon, so reset it back to level 1 while gaining some sort of element on it, like the ability to put your clan tag on the gun or a kill counter on the gun like we've seen in the past, and then they can work through and rank it up again, and maybe even multiple times for each of the guns. I feel like that's the best middle ground where it isn't a really daunting task just to unlock some decent attachments on your gun, while still providing the option for a long-term grind for the heavy grinders out there. Now after that, focusing on the non-gameplay elements, of course, I can't make this video without mentioning matchmaking. The big thing I'm hoping for this year is just a rework to how they handle their skill-based or engagement-optimized matchmaking system. I definitely understand some need or desire to protect brand new players or the really low skill players, and I do think a matchmaking system should be doing that to some extent. But if the rumors are true and they are reworking this, I just want to see the matchmaking system be a little bit less obvious or less reactive, and more so just something that's gently guiding things in the background so you don't really notice it as heavily as you do currently. And with this, ping should always be king, so your connection quality should never be sacrificed for a better skill match. And the main thing with this is I just want to see more incentive or reward for improving at the game. It should feel good to be good at the game or to get better at the game. You should be able to clearly notice improvement in your in-game performance over time if you are actively getting better at the game. Because with the system we've been dealing with for the past 3 years, it just doesn't feel like that's the case, and so many players have burnt out from this. To top that off, I'm also going to be mentioning I'd love to see persistent lobbies. I know this is a bit of a stretch. I know it's unlikely we'll be seeing lobbies that stick together this year, but that's not going to stop me from mentioning it because persistent lobbies, I feel, brings a lot more of the social aspect back to the game, and it also opens up a lot more room to have map voting, which is another thing on my wish list. Players should have at least some control over what maps they end up playing, even if it's just a veto so you can vote to skip the map that's coming up next. And with that, that covers it for the primary non-gameplay items on my wish list here. Now let's move into the elements that more directly relate to the gameplay itself. And the first thing I'm going to mention is an FOV slider on all platforms. I hope we get that. I fully expect at this point we will, but I'm just kind of like looking back to Infinity Ward's previous game where they didn't have an FOV slider. Additionally, something that's actually pretty high up on my list here, I would love to see the return of score streaks. Not Cold War style score streaks, the more traditional like Black Ops 2 style score streaks. I would love to see that, especially for objective-based game modes, and not as a perk either. I feel like it should be the default, because in my experience, it's the best way to get Call of Duty players to actively engage with the objective. It's by no means perfect, and it doesn't completely prevent people from camping in some objectively insignificant area of the map to get their streaks, but on average, it does encourage people to engage with the objective a lot more and care more about that, and it also tends to reward people appropriately depending on how much they contributed toward the team. And that's a far superior system in my opinion, because it not only encourages and rewards desirable play in objective game modes, it also feels more fair in the sense that if you play the objective, you get rewarded for it. On top of this, I would love to see the return of the Specialist Strike package, so instead of earning your kill streak rewards, you earn more perks as you go on a streak in the same life. And this is something I do sort of anticipate will be in this game, just because Specialist is an Infinity Ward thing, and we do tend to see it with their games, but I just wanted to make sure it was on the list anyway. As for the next big thing on my list, I want to see much more balanced footstep audio compared to what we saw in Modern Warfare 2019. So no crazy range on that, so you can't hear somebody through a wall like 30 meters away from you or anything and know exactly where they are because of that. But at the same time, I do feel like there should be some footstep audio, maybe a little bit more than what we have in Vanguard, for instance. However, alongside that, I would also love to see dead silence as a perk. Not a field upgrade, but a perk. And I don't mind if it's in a competitive tier of perks and you really have to sacrifice something to get that. I just feel like it should always be an option in Call of Duty, because it always has been an option in Call of Duty, with only 2 exceptions since COD 4. One of them was Advanced Warfare, where footstep audio was the least of your concern. It was usually your exosuit audio that mattered. And then the other one was Modern Warfare 2019. For me, dead silence is a staple of the franchise and should remain so. It's fine that in other games you can use audio as your primary source of awareness, but in Call of Duty, I just strongly disagree with that being the case, because I feel you shouldn't be heavily punished just for deciding to sprint on the map. Sprinting should be a very normal thing in a Call of Duty game. I shouldn't feel as though I have to crouch walk around just to make sure I'm not being heard by enemy players. And I'm totally fine sacrificing a potentially other great perk in the game if that means I can have silent footsteps, like I've been able to do in every other Call of Duty game aside from Modern Warfare 2019. Moving around the map quickly shouldn't be discouraged in a game like Call of Duty. As for the next thing on my list, let's talk a little bit about map design. For me, I really didn't like the general map design philosophy they had in Modern Warfare 2019, and I just felt like most of the maps, or at least most of the maps that the game launched with, didn't have very good flow. That was my primary issue with it, is a lack of flow. For many of the maps, it was almost as if the map design was trying to get you to just lock down an area or lock down a position, because that was simply the most effective way to play in that map. So even if you didn't like that style of play, it almost felt like you were funneled into that style of play due to how they chose to design the maps. And I'm just hoping that's a big focus for them this year. Based on the leaks and rumors, apparently they did learn some lessons with Modern Warfare 2019, and there was a reason so many people would only play Shoot House and Shipment. And apparently, according to those rumors, they have adjusted their map design philosophy, so I'm excited to see what they bring us. I just hope the maps have a bit more flow to them, and I also want to see a good variety of maps as well. I don't necessarily want every map to be super strict 3-lane with very little complexity or freedom of movement between lanes, but I would like to see some maps like that, just like I'd like to see some maps that are a lot more open and a bit more complex. And speaking of maps, on my wish list, I'm really hoping for at least 14 maps at launch with the game. When it came to Modern Warfare 2019, the map count was quite disappointing at launch, especially for just 6v6 game modes, and the same thing was true with Cold War, and I just hope we don't run into that again this time around. Next up, let's talk a little bit about spawns. My wish list here is basically I do not want to see whatever spawn logic they used for Modern Warfare 2019, as well as the beginning of Call of Duty Vanguard. I don't want to see anything like that spawn logic at all. I'm not asking for them to improve on that system. I'm asking them to scrap that entirely and start from scratch, or just revert back to the old school style of Call of Duty spawns, where map control actually mattered. Map control and understanding the big picture and controlling the big picture is a huge higher level skill in Call of Duty. And Modern Warfare 2019 spawn logic threw a lot of that out the window, which in my opinion significantly dumbed down the game, and it really reduced the depth and complexity of the game, especially at the higher levels of play. Speaking of spawns, another thing that I hope doesn't return this time around with Modern Warfare 2, at least for the regular like 6v6 style multiplayer, I hope they get rid of that spawn fly-in camera and any sort of a respawn delay in regular modes like Team Deathmatch or Domination, for instance. I think that fly-in animation works fine for something like Ground War, but in the case of regular multiplayer for Call of Duty, I just don't feel like it fits. Plus, it provides you with information that I feel you shouldn't necessarily have coming off of spawn. And I remember in the beta for Vanguard, we had that fly-in animation, and based on player feedback, they removed it, and the general response was quite positive, so I'm hoping it doesn't return for regular multiplayer. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about doors. Personally, I'm not a fan of doors. I think outside of a tactical style mode like Search and Destroy, doors don't really fit super well in Call of Duty. But at the same time, it's not like a major game-breaking issue for me. It wasn't my biggest complaint with Modern Warfare 2019. So all I'm going to say about doors is I'd prefer if they didn't have them, but if they're going to have them, I hope they're the Vanguard style where they are fully destructible, or you can shoot through them to create a hole in them and then you can shoot through that hole. But indestructible doors, I feel, are a big no-no for Modern Warfare 2. And going off of that, let's talk a little bit about destruction and the destructible areas that Vanguard introduced to Call of Duty, where there's a bunch of like broken walls that were then like patched up with some wood or some bricks or something, and you can break through those. This is one of those things where I feel like it doesn't really add much to the gameplay experience, and if anything, they're often just buggy and create some inconsistency in the game that I'd rather not see. So with Modern Warfare 2, I hope we don't see destruction, at least not to the same extent that we saw in Vanguard. Maybe like the odd little piece of cover here or there throughout the map, I could live with some destruction there. I just don't want to see too many of these destructible areas. Since we're on the topic of Vanguard elements, I also hope in Modern Warfare 2 we don't see any bloom or aim down sight spread, or basically just inaccuracy with your bullet that's entirely random and out of your control, so the bullet doesn't go where you're aiming. I don't think that fits with a game like Call of Duty. I don't want to see that at all. If they want to make guns less effective at longer ranges, either give them more recoil, reduce the bullet velocity, or add another damage drop-off range for longer ranges to give it a very slow time to kill beyond its effective range. When it comes to aiming and shooting at targets, I want my bullets to go where I'm aiming. Additionally, from Vanguard, the suppression mechanic. I hope this never returns to the Call of Duty franchise. I feel like it just brings in some inconsistency and frustration without adding anything positive to the gameplay experience, so just get rid of it entirely. Next up, another thing that I really hope they keep in check. This is awareness style perks. So perks like piercing vision, high alert, intuition, forward intel, all of these perks that give you information on the location of enemy players without you really having to earn that information, without you having to do anything special. It's just revealing enemies through walls or letting you know an enemy is near you just because you have this perk equipped. And I'm not saying that there isn't any place for any of these perks. I think it's fine if they pick like one or two of them and if there's decent counterplay to that. My hope with my wish list here is that they just keep them in check and they don't go completely overboard like they did with Vanguard, in my opinion. After that, let's talk a little bit about the Gunsmith. I do feel it's quite likely that the Gunsmith will be returning. It seems to be quite popular with the community. And when it comes to this, I hope they go much more in the direction of Modern Warfare's Gunsmith compared to Cold War's and especially Vanguard's. I really don't want to see the ability to have 10 attachments on your gun at any given time, unless you have to give up like all of your perks to get that. That would be fine by me. But I don't like the idea of having 10 attachments because when you have so many attachments that have all these various effects, you can always just kit out a gun exactly how you want to kit it out. You don't have to learn how to play to a gun's strengths or avoid its weaknesses when you can just make up for all of that by stacking on whatever attachments you want to stack on. I feel like with this, a lot of guns lost their individuality, and also the sense of variety sort of went out the window because I can turn any gun into the gun that I want it to be rather than the gun that it actually is. So I don't want to see 10 attachments. I think 5 is totally fine, so you do have to make some careful choices with attachments. And then on top of that, I don't want to see any attachments that significantly change the time to kill of a weapon. I don't want to see higher caliber ammo that just massively boosts your damage and therefore significantly improves your time to kill potential. I'd just like the attachments to work much more like they did in Modern Warfare 2019. Additionally, when we're talking about the Gunsmith, I hope they follow suit with Cold War and Vanguard here and display real stats for the gun. Not those stat bars that are often misleading and inaccurate, but actual stats of the weapon. I hope that returns with Modern Warfare 2. As for the next thing on my list, I'd love to see the return of a traditional Call of Duty minimap, where if you fire an unsilenced gun, you show up as a red dot on the minimap for the other players. And don't get this twisted, this isn't about me wanting to chase red dots, this is about improving the general pacing of the game. When you have those red dots appearing on the minimap for everyone, in my experience, that tends to get players moving around the map. Now, some people will straight up chase red dots, but at least that gets them moving, and eventually, if they're working on improving their gameplay, they'll realize that that tends to not be the best strategy, and you can learn how to strategize around those red dots so you're not chasing them, but you're taking advantage of the people that are chasing them. Now, if they do this though, of course, they would have to balance suppressors properly, and I would hope that suppressors come with really noticeable trade-offs, like a significant reduction to your damage range, or maybe a massive drop in bullet velocity. They could just assume that you're using subsonic rounds when you're using a suppressor to justify dropping the bullet velocity. And that way, the suppressors would have a proper trade-off, and it wouldn't necessarily be a crutch for every player out there. On top of that, to prevent suppressors from being a complete crutch, I really like what they did with a lot of the muzzle attachments in Cold War, where you would have different concealment values, where with something like a flash hider, you wouldn't be completely off the radar, you would still show up as a red dot when you fired, but that red dot wouldn't linger. It would only pop up for a brief moment, and therefore it would take somebody really actively paying attention to the minimap in that moment to be able to see you firing that. I think that's another thing that would prevent suppressors from being a complete crutch in-game. And with that, this video is getting quite long. There's a bunch of other little things I could mention here. I guess I'll just tack on one more, and this is, I hope they stop hiding deaths from the scoreboard, or any stats for that matter. I think the more stats and metrics available to the player, the better. Give us access to everything. If players want their feelings protected, maybe give them the option to control what goes on their scoreboard. But hiding a stat like deaths from a first-person shooter where you're trying to kill people and not be killed by them is complete nonsense, and it should be readily available for the players that want to see that. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for my Modern Warfare 2 wish list. Obviously, I could have pulled out quite a few more things on this list, but I want this video to be a reasonable length. These are a lot of the primary things where, if they even implemented a decent handful of these, I think that would be excellent. Now, of course, this is just my list based on my preferences and my experiences. I'd like to hear from you guys in the comment section below. What is your Modern Warfare 2 wish list, or at least what are some of the highlights of your wish list? If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.